Welcome to USFL Game Plan, brought to you by USFL Today. We are your hosts. I'm Angelo Fiouris, and that's Luke Miller of the Pro Football Newsroom. Luke, welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Glad we can do this again.
Yeah, it's great. Again, we're going to be doing this every single week, and we may as well get right into it. Last week, week 6, if people were looking for any clarity out of last week's results, they didn't get it, did they?
I'm afraid not. I'm afraid we might not have clarity until week 10, the final game after week 10 at this point, because who knows what's going to happen.
It's pretty wild. You've got 3 teams in the South tied for first. You got 3 teams in the North tied for second. Essentially, 7 of the 8 teams in the league are clinging to a piece of a playoff spot. That is pretty wild with only 30% of the season to go.
Yeah, I mean, it's on the one hand, it's pretty cool, like just to have a league with that level of parity. I mean, I think if it was the opposite case where it was like week 6 and it was already decided basically who the playoff teams were going to be, we'd kind of be like, oh, well, that's kind of lame, and the last couple of weeks wouldn't mean much. So it's kind of fun that it's as tight as it is. But for us prognosticators, it's not very fun at the same time because we're like, we're trying to figure out what's happening and predict what's going to happen, and we all really actually have no clue what we're talking about. So it's an interesting dynamic for sure.
It's funny the way you described that a moment ago, because Luke, a year ago by week 7, we knew who the playoff teams essentially were going to be. New Jersey was 6-1 or 5-1 going into week 7. They were essentially clinched because the second place spot was assured. Same for Birmingham. And at that time, they had New Orleans still nipping at their heels, and the Stars in the North had already started to take hold as well. So it was already kind of played out in advance that we knew who those teams were going to be. Week 9 and 10 were very uneventful last season, as a matter of fact.
Yeah. Last year, it definitely, like you said, kind of we pretty much knew who the teams were. Whereas this year, there's so many scenarios right now. I started to kind of think through, well, what has to happen, and I stopped about 2 minutes into that because it's just like, this, to use the Stallions as one example, right? It's like they play the Breakers this week, but then the Gamblers and the Showboats play, and then they play Northern teams next week. But in the end, the Stallions play the Showboats, then the Gamblers, or I think it's the other way around, the Gamblers, then the Showboats, and it's just like, depending on how, but then the Showboats and the Gamblers have to play the Breakers, and depending on how all those games go, it's just like there's literally a million scenarios of what could happen. So
too many permutations.
Exactly.
For sure, to try to look ahead 3 steps on the chessboard right now is an exercise in madness. So rather than try to figure that out, let's take a look back, Luke, at a week ago and discuss how the hell we got to where we're at today with all these teams within a game of one another. The opening game of the weekend last weekend was the Memphis Showboats, who were 0-3. They're now 3-3 because they took down the Pittsburgh Maulers, who have dropped to 2-4, and in the process, pitching the first shutout by a defense in the USFL this year. Not the team I would have predicted would have been the one to do that.
Yeah, they've come so far from where they were at the beginning of the season. I mean, after week 2, when they got shellacked by Birmingham 42-2, I mean, I think people were ready to write them off at that point, and we're like, is this team going to win a game this season? Now, I don't know. But they've gotten so much better, and their defense, like you said, has been a huge part of that. I mean, finding Cole Kelly as the starting quarterback, obviously, it's kind of made things click on the offensive side of the ball, but the defense has really turned things around. And on the opposite side, the Pittsburgh Maulers, I think this week was really a step back for them. They obviously had some offensive struggles at the beginning of the year. They seem to have kind of figured that out, and we're moving in a good direction with Troy Williams. And then this was just a total regression for them, back to a really tough offensive outing. So not a good time in the season to be regressing back into bad habits from the beginning of the year.
Yeah, they looked like the offense from weeks 1 and 2, as opposed to the one we thought we were starting to see some improvement. Going back to the Showboats for a moment, actually talking about this game, a week ago on the show, I had said to you that I felt that the team that was going to control the clock was the one that was going to win the game, but I felt it was going to be the Maulers. That worked out to be the other way around, because the Showboats, at the very least, found some semblance of a running game with Juwan Washington gaining 72 yards last week. So that definitely helped their balance. offensively. And let's not forget the incredible return by Derek Dillon, Luke, with that tightrope job at the back of the end zone, which he then returned all the way for a 109-yard touchdown, man. That was an amazing play. I was literally out of my seat watching that play.
I don't know why they didn't give him 110 yards on that. I'm like, what's my man got to do to get to 110? Because he literally was just, there. I mean, there was centimeters between him and the back of the end zone. But I guess maybe 110 is impossible. But yeah, I mean, it was incredible play. And I one of the things I've said kind of from the beginning of the year, talking a little bit more about the Stallions and some other teams, but now you got to say this about Memphis. The best teams are able to win in all three phases of the game, whether that's offense, defense, special teams. And Memphis, their turnaround has really captured all three of those. It's not just that the offense is playing better. It's not just that the defense is better. You also got to factor in the special teams. I mean, on all aspects of the game, they've really come a long way from where they were. And there's no reason they can't be a playoff team and maybe even a championship team if they continue on the trajectory that they've been on. They control their own destiny, even though they're last right now in the South.
That's a pretty incredible exclamation point on that conversation. The second game on Saturday last week was the Birmingham Stallions traveling up to Detroit to take care of the Pittsburgh Panthers. I almost said. All right, here we go. Who the hell are the Pittsburgh Panthers?
Yeah, new team, new franchise.
Yeah, new franchise, right. All right, 3, 2, 1. The second game on Saturday, Luke, was the Birmingham Stallions traveling to Detroit to take on the Michigan Panthers. And no problem there for the Stallions, 27-13 winners. They even found a running game last week, which is something I think they need if they're going to go where they want to this year.
Yeah, I mean, we've all obviously seen Alex McGough and what he can do, but I don't think it's a recipe for a championship winning team if it's just one player that's carrying your offense. And so I think Coach Holtz has talked about that and recognizes that. And I know he challenged the Stallions this past week about, challenge the offensive line and the rest of the offense that, hey, we need to be able to run the ball against a very good front seven in Michigan. And they really answered that call. And similar to when they played Pittsburgh a couple of weeks ago,
right.
They really tried to establish the run. And Coach Holtz, the way he said it was, if we can kind of, beat them at what they're best at, stopping the run, and we can run the ball, then they'll sort of, the dam will break and everything else will kind of open up. And so that kind of worked out for them this week. And CJ Marble had a great game, especially late in the game. They really just the Panthers didn't have an answer for, kind of the read option that they were running. And it was definitely a good sign for them at this point in the season.
It feels like the Panthers don't have an answer for much of anything anymore after their torrid 2-0 start, Luke. And if there's anything that epitomizes this downslide for them, it's that faulty fire drill that went down right before the half last week as they were scrambling, trying to figure out whether to spike the ball, kick a field goal, throw a pass, or what. That was, I don't think I've ever seen anything quite like that in football.
Yeah, I was at the game. I was on the sideline when that all happened, and it was just one of those things where everybody in the stadium after it happened was kind of like looking around, scratching their heads, like, "What the heck? Like, what is going on?" And I think it does in some ways capture kind of the Panthers. It's been one step forward, two steps back. Or they'll do something great and then shoot themselves in the foot. And there were times last week against the Stallions where, I mean, they looked good. The touchdown drive that they had in the third quarter where Love found Hikutini in the back of the end zone. I mean, they had some good drives, but, missed a field goal in the first half after a decent drive.
Right.
Had a great drive to end the first half, but obviously, like we're talking about, just ended up squandering it and coming away with nothing. So that's not a recipe for success. And, the defense has played well. They've forced, I think, 12 turnovers, but I think the offense has given away the ball 11 times or something like that.
Their plus minus ratio is 0.
Yeah. So I think it's like 12 and 12.
Yeah.
It's like, if you just said, hey, this defense has forced 12 turnovers, like, man, that team's probably doing pretty good. But then when you get to the other side of it, it's like, oh, well, that kind of negates any success they're having on that side of the ball. So, they've got some good pieces there, and I hate it for the Michigan fans. Like I said, I was there this past weekend. It was their 4th home game in a row. Still had a pretty good crowd. And, people, at points got really into the game when the Panthers kind of showed some life.
Right.
But, otherwise they haven't had a lot to cheer about. So hopefully they can kind of figure some things out. They've got one more home game, so maybe they can give people, something to get excited about in that game. But right now they're probably maybe more than any other team in the USFL really, really struggling to kind of put things together.
Yeah, I agree. And we'll talk about their upcoming matchup in a moment and what implications that has for the rest of their season. But let's review the games from Sunday last week. One of the games that was a real surprise, or maybe shouldn't be now, as we've got a bigger picture to kind of analyze, is the Breakers falling to the Stars, the revived Philadelphia Stars, who pulled one off 16-10 over New Orleans. Luke, in the last two wins, the Stars have no offensive touchdowns, 11 field goals, and their defense has woken up all of a sudden. So what's happening in Philadelphia to turn this thing around?
That's a great question. I mean, you alluded to this, but after the Stars game, I tweeted out, imagine somebody told you 2 weeks ago that the Stars were going to beat the Generals and the Breakers, and they were going to do it without scoring one offensive touchdown. I mean, that's so absurd. Like, if that was a betting line, I would have, been ready to bet the house on that being false. But here we are.
Right.
So, I think the big thing for the Stars right now, and like you said, is the way their defense is playing. I mean, they're not winning games because they're putting up tons of points. I mean, again, they haven't even scored a touchdown in the last two games. They've been able to move the ball. Obviously, you got to be able to move the ball to get in field goal range as much as they have, but they can't finish a drive. And so I think a lot of the credit needs to go to their defense, the way that they're playing, kind of with their hair on fire, going up against two good offenses in the Generals and the Breakers, but really containing both of those teams and keeping their team in the game. And then, obviously, again, like I said earlier, we're talking about all three phases of the game. The special teams, I mean, if Aguilar misses one, two, three of those kicks, which when you're kicking 8 a game, I mean, that, it's not unreasonable to miss a couple of them. And then, last week, I think he was 3 for 4, which is still great. So, obviously in the defense and the special teams, the way that they're kind of putting them in good field position, at least getting something out of some of these drives they've put together. And then the way the defense has been playing, I think if I was a Stars fan, I would probably feel cautiously hopeful, right? Like the offense, I think, still needs to figure out how to put more points on the board if they're going to make a deep run late into the season. But some of the challenges they had at the beginning of the year in terms of the defense and in terms of the offensive line, they seem to have kind of figured those out, or at least they seem to be getting a lot better. And so I think the jury's still out on how good the Stars actually are. I ran a poll on my Twitter. It was like, I had like all these kind of competing stats, or like on the one hand, here's all these really impressive things about the Stars, but then on the other hand, here's all these like very not impressive things about the Stars. Like, and then I just said, like, are the Stars actually good? Yes or no? And 2/3 of people said no. So, a lot of people are still not convinced that the Stars are actually a very good team. But I think they're obviously moving in the right direction. And the thing about it is, is the last thing I'll say about it. But the thing with football and football teams is there's so much that goes into it that you can't capture on a piece of paper, right? In terms of I was at an event yesterday interviewing Coach Holtz, and he was talking about the injuries, and he was saying, the thing about the injuries is, yeah, people can see on paper, oh, well, this guy had this many tackles, this guy had this many plays, but you can't see on paper what a guy means to a team in terms of his leadership, his knowledge of the game, how he encourages other players and make sure they're in the right place to make plays. And so at the same time with the Stars, right, like there's so many factors that go into where they are now. I think that team has to be playing with a level of confidence, with a level of belief in themselves, to have gone from last in the division and feeling like they were on the cusp of being out of it to now all of a sudden they beat two really good teams. They're first in the North. The path to the North Championship kind of runs through them right now, late in the season. I mean, that's got to feel great for them. And I think so. They made the championship last year. Like Bart Andrus is a good coach. I feel like people there, they've got a great quarterback. Like they've got the pieces. So I've got to think that people on the team are really buying in. They're really believing like, hey, actually, yeah, we're all right. Like we can do this. We can make a run. So, I mean, remains to be seen. But I think they've got some momentum, and that means a lot. I think, more than me maybe probably appreciate sometimes.
Spoke with Channing Stribling 2 weeks ago prior to the Generals game. And one of the things that we talked about was the fact that the Stars have been in that spot before. They did it a year ago. They were kind of on the verge of their season sort of being over before they picked up steam around week 5 and carried that all the way through the playoffs to a championship game appearance. And Stribling agreed with me and said, yeah, this is something that we've already talked about in our locker room, that this is familiar territory for us. So nobody was panicking. No one was losing their minds, and everyone just kept their minds on what was supposed to happen next, as far as what they can control. And we've seen it now in the results, which is you've got a team that's, a veteran team in a sense, because they've been together now for a year and a half and have been through this exact same kind of situation. So the Stars, while not doing it quite the same way they did a year ago, have found a way to do it. And I think like the crafty fashion in which they've done it is a testament to their experience, to their coaching staff, and to the players, like you said, for buying into what they do there and staying the course. Now, as far as the New Orleans Breakers go, Luke, I spoke with Bethel Thompson just the week of the Generals game, and one of the things I asked him that day was if he was surprised that the offense was clicking so well, and did he not at least expect them to have some kind of warm-up period? His answer was that was the warm-up period, but ever since that day, they have not even combined to score more points than they did against the Stallions.
Yeah, I think he jinxed them.
I think he jinxed himself.
Yeah, maybe. That's probably true, yeah. But no, you're right. They scored 45 points against the Stallions in week 3. Since then, they've scored 40. And they're averaging basically 13 points per game the last 3 weeks.
13, yeah, right.
And that's not good, and not good for an offense that looked unstoppable the first couple of weeks. They put up 38 against Houston. Obviously, Pittsburgh, good defense. First week they had, they only put up 22. It was a little tighter of a game, but
a lot of red zone trips with the field goals. Yeah. So, they were in there.
Right. So you go from 22 to 38 to 45. And then you on average, you don't even eclipse 2 touchdowns for the next 3 games.
Yeah.
So not where you want to be. And yeah, I don't know, right now the good news for them is because of the way they played at the beginning of the year, they're still first in the South Division, tiebreakers and things like that. So they're fine in terms of, everybody really at this point kind of controls their own destiny if they can kind of take care of business on the back half of the season. But right. I would have to think some alarm bells kind of need to be going off because, their defense is good, but their defense, I wouldn't say is great, or I don't think it's one of the best in the league. And so they're not going to give up, 40 points a game, but they're also not going to – it's not like the Maulers or the Generals or something where it's like you're almost guaranteed to like, all right, they're going to hold them to about 20 points or less, And right. That offense, I think, needs to be able to put up some points if they're going to be able to win. And the past 3 weeks, they just haven't. And so, turn the ball over. They haven't had the success on, like third down situation right. and finishing drives that they did, against the Stallions and the Gamblers. And so this week will be a huge test for them. I mean, I think the Stallions have a little bit of momentum coming off, a big win against Michigan. They look pretty dominant. The defense, has got some pieces back. Some people are getting healthy for them. Obviously, on the offensive side of the ball, Magoo is playing out of his mind. So, they're going to have to really figure some things out this week because a loss this week, now all of a sudden, depending on what happens, in the Gambler Showboats game, they might be sitting outside of the playoff, top 2 spots in the South. So it's kind of it's getting to that kind of crunch time moment for them. So we'll see what they can do, but yeah, not trending in the right direction.
Stallions technically the road team this week in Birmingham because it's a New Orleans home game. And obviously that doesn't matter much from an on the field perspective, really, and not from a crowd perspective because all the fans are still going to be the Birmingham fans, right? But for those of the viewers that have not been to a USFL game at a hub Yet when the non-host teams are playing, they typically still treat the game as a home game for that team. So, for example, when the Generals are hosting Michigan on Sunday, everything around there is going to be all about the Generals. Hey, Generals fans. Hey, it's the Generals mascot. Everything's going to be red and blue and gold. And so this weekend in Birmingham, I would expect that environment is going to be all geared towards, and they're going to put that performance on the same way, Luke, right? The cheerleaders should probably be the Breakers cheerleaders, right? And the Dave the Wave will be out there, and they'll be asking oddly enough, asking the Breakers fans to make some noise. That's going to be wild, man.
It's definitely going to be like some cognitive dissonance like going on for people. And the funny thing is, which, I mean, this is just the dynamic of the hub system, right? I don't really know that you could do it much differently. But on the one hand, you have, well, technically on the books, this is a Breakers home game. They'll be on the home sideline. They'll be wearing blue, all those kinds of things. But then on the other hand, like for ticket sales and stuff like that, the league is advertising it as like, well, there's only 2 home games left for the Stallions, one being this weekend. So it's like, on the one hand, it's like, everybody knows, well, this is really a Stallions home game, right? But on the other hand, like technically, it's also a Breakers home game. So it's like, you try and wrap your head around it. It's a little bit confusing, but I will be interested to see, the Breakers, they've got some trash talkers on their team. I don't know if you saw the
only
video.
A couple.
Yeah, that's right. I don't know if you saw the video clip of Diggs talking smack to Blob.
That was great. That was great.
Yeah.
I rewound that about 30 times.
Yeah. And so I'll be interested to see how that dynamic plays out this Saturday when you're in Protective Stadium. You've got, who knows, 10,000 or more Stallions fans sitting right behind the Breakers bench. And, Stallions fans, obviously they've had a year head start compared to other kind of fan bases in the league. But, having been in Michigan this past week, I do know that there's definitely some Stallions fans that get into the game and yell and do their thing. So I'm interested to see kind of how that dynamic plays out with the heckling, maybe back and forth. The Breakers aren't a team that are just going to take it, So it'll be interesting to see what that dynamic is like on the sideline this weekend.
Yeah, Diggsy is not afraid to mix it up with anybody verbally or physically for that matter. So it should be very, very, very fun and entertaining from in-stadium perspective. That's for sure. Let's move on to the Gamblers and the Generals last week. This was an excellent game if you love defense, because both defenses were spot on a week ago. In this matchup, the Generals showed that the Gamblers' offense can be slowed down. Meanwhile, the Gamblers showed that they could win a tough game in a low-scoring affair.
Yeah, I mean, the Gamblers, let's start with them. You could definitely make a case that they are one of, if not the hottest team in the league right now. Won 4 in a row.
They have to be.
And against good teams. I mean, beat the Stallions in Birmingham, obviously beat New Jersey this week. And so, they've and like you just said, they've got lots of pieces. I mean, at the beginning of the year, it kind of looked like, well, they've got this kind of high flying offense, but they're turnover prone. Their defense is, kind of struggling with all those pieces they lost from last year, and just wasn't sure if they were really a complete team. But obviously getting Mark Thompson back has been huge for their offense. Now Kenji doesn't really have to kind of do everything, which TJ Pledger, was doing a great job for them too at the beginning of the year. But I felt like at one point, week 2, 3 into the season, Kenji was kind of, getting better and better and doing a lot for them. But obviously just having Thompson, it really kind of makes their offense click in a whole new way. And then the defense has really kind of settled in. And as you mentioned, gotten a lot better than they were doing at the beginning of the year, seemed to have kind of figured things out. And so Curtis Johnson's doing a great job there. They're, primed to make a run deep in the year here. Obviously, they still got to play, every team in the South again. So, they could find themselves out of the playoff if they don't continue to play at the level that they have. But they're in a good spot to, make a run deep in the year. So, that's the gamblers. On the other side of the ball, the Generals, you're the
Huh.
expert on the Generals, so you can speak to it better than me. But I'm not sure what's going on in New Jersey. Obviously the defense is amazing. They continue to play lights out, giving up, 15 to 20 points a game or less. And so can't ask for a lot more from them. But offensively, they just, you know, without Cavante Turpin, with Trey Williams kind of having been hurt and in and out, and with the turnovers that have kind of
Right.
happened this year, and then ultimately with the lack of stability at the quarterback spot, last year I felt like Riley kind of got away with the two quarterback thing because he did. I mean, to his credit, he did a good job with it. He would kind of bring DeAndre in and sort of maybe situational moments, or
Right.
it was kind of like it felt like there was a little more, you know, logic to how he kind of did it. And obviously, Luis Perez was a great quarterback. DeAndre is a great quarterback, so it kind of worked. But this year, what they've done has not worked. And really at this point, they've played three quarterbacks, and week to week, no one even really knows like who is going to be out there. And I just don't know what the thinking is behind that. So they're still a really good team, and fortunately for them, they're in a division that's a little weaker. So they again control their own destiny. They can make a late run, but they got to figure things out on the offensive side of the ball, because what they're doing right now, obviously, it ain't going to cut it.
So for the Generals, the problems have been kind of there's been a few of them. You said the turnovers, that's number one. The penalties, the bad penalties has been another one. I mean, last week they had two different ineligible man downfield penalties, wiping out big plays, both of them by the same player. I hate to call a guy out, but the center strayed too far downfield on two different occasions. One wiped out a pass on the opening drive, which had the Generals sitting on the Gamblers' 30-yard line 2 plays into the game. Instead, it got called back and they had the punt. So that destroyed any early flow or momentum they could have gotten out of that game or out of that play. But then later on, they had a touchdown wiped off the play, Cam Eccles Looper, because of that same penalty. They did score later on in that same drive, so the harm was mitigated. However, they lost about a minute, minute and a half off the clock because they had to go backwards before they could go forward. So the penalties have really hurt them. The lack of having that game breaker like a Turpin has hurt them because it feels to me like the Generals' offensive game plan has lacked any real creativity. They look just to me like a regular offense who are not running any sort of plays to create either a diversion or a misdirection or anything like that. No trickery. Cam Eccles Looper, for example, the guy throws like a quarterback. They haven't
Yeah.
utilized him in any end around options once this year, whereas last year they used him on that sort of play at least 3 different times. So not that I'm advocating for start doing that play specifically, but it just goes to show you how the amount of creativity gone into the Generals game plan has come down from a year ago. The other thing, Luke, about the Generals is that a year ago they were getting away with penalties like the ones that are costing them this year. They did the same thing a year ago. It's just that they were squeaking by. All of their games are close this year, just as they were a year ago. The difference is that the game-changing plays have gone the way of the opposition in most cases. And that's what the Generals have to turn around and fine tune if they're going to go where they think they should go, which is into the playoffs. And I feel like they still can do it because of the personnel that they do possess. If this were a different team, like Michigan, for example, I'd be wondering if it's even possible for them to turn it around. But the Generals have the type of horses that it takes to get there, and they did it a year ago with most of these same guys. So quarterback's a problem unless they just say DeAndre's our guy and we're committing to him and we're going to roll with this, because the other two quarterbacks, while talented, don't possess the same sort of spark that DeAndre has.
Yeah, and I
There it
think,
is.
yeah, when I think in this league, right, if you're struggling offensively to either run the ball with your running backs, to have creative playmakers on the outside in space, like again, they lost Turpin, just what a mobile quarterback can bring, he can bail you out of a lot, right? And
Right.
so that's what I wonder of, it's not like, Lauletta's a good quarterback and had some good throws this past week, but he can't just kind of be put in a bind and create something out of nothing in the way that DeAndre can with his legs. And so, for an offense that struggled, like you said, to have a spark, you would think that that would be, something that could really benefit them. But he doesn't even get a snap last week. So,
I was just going to say that. Like, I don't understand that part at all. Okay, you want to try the other guy. All right. I'm not for it because DeAndre to me is the dude. At least they said that he was going to be the dude after week 3. But to not get him in at all, especially in some of those certain situations where he'd have been really valuable in, like, oh, I don't know, that 4th and 2 they tried to go for on the very first drive of the game, which was clearly going to be a handoff to Darius Victor, with no threat of an option to give the ball to on that. It did make sense to me for DeAndre to not be in the game at all. It didn't make sense to me for him to not be starting either. So we'll see what the Generals are going to do over these last 4 weeks. They're very cagey with their personnel decisions, and they play very, very close to the vest. And every time I talk to them, they don't tell me anything. I have to pull it out of them, and even then, it's some sort of riddle or cryptic response. Best player for the help us this week kind of answer. So it is what it is with the Generals, but they're 2-4. They do hold the second playoff spot right now in the North, which means they do control their own destiny. And beating the Panthers will go a long way in burying the Panthers, because they'll be 2-5 and losing out on a tiebreaker now to the Generals. So that actually eliminates them against one team in case of a tie, and hopefully and would create some distance between New Jersey and at least one of their competitors. I don't even think Coach Riley said it in an interview yesterday. He said, or maybe it was on Sunday in the post-game press conference, something about doesn't really matter, first seed, second seed. You're just looking to grab onto the playoff spot right now because there's not really a home yet for someone to travel to. So that's not what their focus is. Their focus is just to finish out strong and grab the playoff spot. Then see what happens from there. Let's get into these games, shall we? Boy, we pondered a lot on these teams in this first part of the show, didn't we? Memorial Weekend schedule. First game is tomorrow at 4 p.m., and it is a big one, man. It is the Stallions traveling to Birmingham to take on the New Orleans Breakers, the hometown New Orleans Breakers, in a game of 4-2 teams that went at it pretty strong the last time, Luke. It was like, I think you described it as a heavyweight fight. That was a one-score game until the Breakers broke it open late. We talked about the offensive woes for the Breakers almost over nearly the last month of the year. We talked about the Stallions just being, I think, 2-2 now over their last 4 weeks. So neither team quite at their peak recently. And I don't know if we're going to see 45-31 this time around.
No, I think it's going to be a little different dynamic. I certainly don't think either team is going to score that, 45 points. We might see a team hit 30, but I don't. It's not going to be, I think, the same kind of high flying offensive game that it was last time. I had to guess, but it's going to be again, I think, a great game for sure. Two teams that are still, probably two of the better teams in the league. I mean, if you look at the whole body of work from week 1 till now, you've got also two teams that are, I don't know if desperate's the right word, but needing
close.
A win. Yeah, I mean, if you lose this week, you're maybe not done, but it then becomes sort of a desperate, you got to win situation. So a win this week goes a long way to giving yourself at least a little bit of a cushion and breathing room in the South Division. So both teams really needing a win. The Breakers wanting to get back on track after 2 losses. The Stallions wanting to get revenge after that week 3 loss. Obviously, everyone knows this is kind of a big rivalry game. You're going to have the dynamic again of it being an away game for the Stallions, but their fans, 10,000 of their fans or more, hopefully sitting behind the Breakers bench, making their life miserable. So it's going to be a big game. I think it's going to have a little bit of a different feel to it than last time, because these are just coming in at a different place than 2-0 when the Stallions were coming off a 42-2 win, and the Breakers were kind of trying to establish themselves as the new top dogs. So it'll be interesting to see how this one plays out, but I think it is going to have a little bit of a different feel to it than the week 3 matchup.
Yeah, at worst, the loser of this game falls to 4-3. And while like you said, it's not necessarily critical mass, you end up in a situation where you're in third place if you lose this game because, or at least tied with at least one other team. And if the Showboats happen to win their game against the Gamblers, you're going to see a three-way tie for second in the South after this week. So uh, just the scenarios, like you said earlier, are just wild. Too many permutations. But
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to a hard fought game. I see this one kind of both teams falling in the low 20s in their score. We'll see if that happens. Moving on to the other game at night tomorrow, that's the Stars and the Maulers. The second time these two are linking up. And last time around, the Stars won the game because the Maulers turned it over 3 times. And then the teams went on divergent paths from there. But now it seems as if they flipped roles and the Stars are on the upswing. The Maulers are on the downswing. And I'm trying to figure out how I can see Pittsburgh pulling this one out. I'm not sure if I do.
Yeah, this will be an interesting one. This is one where it's like you could see a final score of like, 10-9 or something like that.
Oh,
Because,
yeah.
The Stars defense, as we talked about, has finally kind of figured some things out. And on the other hand, the Maulers offense is kind of gone back to their
They've
old way.
unfigured things out.
Right. So, hard to say how many points they'll be able to put up. But again, on the other hand, the Maulers have one of the best defenses in the league, and the Stars offense hasn't been able to find the end zone. And so, now I say that, and the final score is going to be like, 38-34 or something,
Oh, you
crazy
know
that
it.
I would expect. But yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, I, I lean towards being a little bit more confident in the Stars, but again, kind of like we talked about earlier, the jury's still a little out on them and how good they actually are. And the thing about the Maulers is it's kind of similar to the Generals. The defense is so good, you kind of can count on that. If the offense can just have a semi decent outing, then they're in it. They can easily win. So it's just kind of like I lean towards the Stars just because I think they're starting to kind of figure things out. And I think eventually that offense is going to click and they're going to find the end zone. I mean, they're not going to go, scoreless offensively for, 5 games or something like that. So this might be the week where they finally kind of punch it in the end zone. But again, on the other hand, the Maulers, their defense is going to play well. They're going to keep the Stars to a reasonable number of points probably. And so if their offense can just make a few plays, or like we've seen them do in other games, if they can return a kick for a touchdown
Right.
or return for a touchdown or a pick six, or just create points in other ways, then all of a sudden I think it becomes pretty interesting game. So you would think
Yeah,
the
because
Stars.
that would put the pressure on the Stars offense if the Maulers
Yeah.
can manufacture any type of end zone visit. But it's a huge question mark which Pittsburgh team's going to show up because even if the one that does score points shows up, they're only good for like 17. So
Right.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure if it's going to be enough for them to beat the Stars. And in a game like this, as we're entering the later stages of the season, Luke, I'm going to lean to the team with the experience that knows how to win games. And unfortunately for Pittsburgh and their fans, it is the Stars.
Yeah. No, I'm probably with you on that. But if this league has taught me anything this year, be ready for surprises. So
Yeah. Yeah, that's the other part, right? We don't know anything. Let's go into Sunday's games. 2:30 start on the USA Network. It is a South Division matchup taking place in Memphis, where the Gamblers are taking on the Showboats between the two hottest teams in the league. 4-game winning streak for Houston, just coming off that win against Jersey, and the Showboats, of course, with their 22-0 shutout of the Maulers a week ago, having won 3 straight. One of these two teams is going to find themselves with a win and firmly in the mix, whereas the other one is going to take a step backwards, Luke.
yeah, to me, this is probably the most interesting game of the weekend. I mean, the Stallions
Agree.
Breakers game is interesting too, but you got two teams right now that look like they can't lose. I mean, they both have had some vulnerabilities, but I mean, they've both been finding ways to win, whether that's offense, defense, special teams, and they both can't come out on top this week. So,
Right.
the Memphis, obviously they're going to have, I think, a good crowd. I think that the turnaround from the team seems to have really re-energized that fan base. I think that fan base week one, like they were ready to be all in on the Showboats, and then they just didn't give them a lot to get excited about this first couple of weeks. But now it's kind of a whole new thing, and so I think they're going to have a good crowd. They're going to have a good sort of energy behind them. And the way they're playing, they're certainly more than capable of pulling out the win. But again, you're facing a Gamblers team that, as we talked about, can throw the ball, can run the ball, is playing better defense. So I don't know. This one's kind of a coin toss to me. I mean, I'm tending to lean a little bit actually just to the Showboats, because I think the Gamblers have been really good, but even last week, they kind of scraped by in some ways. I mean, if the Generals had been able to just put together a little bit more offense, it might have been a different outcome. And so,
True.
Whereas the Showboats, I mean, they looked dominant last week, and I think they're really, again, kind of like we talked about with the Stars, I think they're really starting to believe and buy in to what they can accomplish as a team. And again, having that momentum, being at sort of with a home crowd behind you, I might lean a little bit that way. But it's hard to go against the Gamblers and the success that they've had. It's just, I feel like they've won a lot of close games, and in this league, the way that things have transpired this year, you can't keep winning. It doesn't seem like any team can keep winning close game after close game after close game. Eventually, the other
Catches
team
up to you.
Yeah. So, but I don't know. Like I said, it's really a coin toss to me. I mean, I could kind of go either way on this one.
Yeah, this is one of those games where just maybe 3 weeks ago felt like the throwaway game of the weekend when you looked ahead. And now it is one of these teams is going to continue on a winning streak. Either the Gamblers are going to have a 5-game streak, which is amazing, or the Showboats are going to be on a 4-game winning streak of their own. So we shall see what happens here in Memphis. But I want to backtrack for a second, which is on something that you said about the crowd being re-energized, the city being a little re-energized by the Showboats turnaround. And I can't tell you how, from a league growth standpoint, how relieved I am that they did manage to win some games and set themselves up to have some nice crowds over these last 3-4 weeks of the season, because there would have been nothing worse than to have the hub empty as the season winds down, and a team playing, for nothing other than just to show up. So kudos to the Showboats for sticking to it, man. And to Coach Todd Haley for A, keeping them together, and B, I got to say his game has improved a little bit in the last couple of weeks, where he's been handling certain like situational calls a lot better than, say, he did earlier in the year or even last season.
Yeah. I saw somebody ask the other day online, it was after either their second or win, or this past week, their third win in a row. But somebody asked like something like, did Todd Haley just save his job? And it's like, I don't know that his job was ever in jeopardy, but that at least that the fact that somebody would say that, I think is kind of a testament to how frustrated Showboats fans and probably just other people in the league watching Memphis felt after the first couple of weeks, just seeming like, kind of what are they doing? But they look like a whole new team, and coaching is a part of that. Haley really has made some good decisions. He's had them really prepared. He's everything's clicking for them right now. So props to him for the way that they've been able to turn things around after a really rough start.
A year ago with Tampa Bay, although they didn't really put a streak together to really fully get back in it or be a threat, they still found themselves playing their way in at like week 7, having a chance at a playoff spot, even though they did fall short. So this year, maybe they will be able to utilize that experience and push through and win a couple of games here and find their way in. We'll see. The last game of the holiday weekend takes place at 5:30 in the afternoon on FS1. Sunday, you got to go searching for the games on Sunday, USA Network and FS1. And it is the Panthers of Michigan traveling to Canton to take on the Generals, both teams at 2-4. The loser finds themselves in a tough spot. If the Panthers lose, they find themselves in critical condition.
Yeah, I think this is definitely a must win for the Panthers. I was at the game this past week, the Panther Stallions game, and Coach Nolan, when he was right, and after the game in the press conference, he said, hey, it sounds crazy based on how we played, but we're like right there in the thick of it. I mean, we're not out of it, and that's totally right. But another loss this week, a five game losing streak and sitting at 2-5, like you said, no tiebreaker against the Generals. I mean, it's going to be hard to, maybe that statistically there's some kind of way that it's possible if they won out the rest of the year or something like that, finish 5-5. But you got to think that at that point the odds are not good. So kind of a must win, I think, for them. And but the Generals too, they need a win too to kind of get back on track and stay as one of the two top teams in the North. And so two teams that are somewhat similar, both have really stout defenses, but not really consistent offenses. I think if I had to pick, I think the Generals are the better team and are going to pull this one out. I think the Generals defense is a little bit better than the Panthers defense, and I think the Generals offense is a little bit better than the Panthers offense. And so, as long as the Generals come out and are able to at least put together a few drives, I think they'll be okay. But
they haven't really been able to do that, Luke. They haven't been able to put together long drives. They haven't had the signature Generals game yet this season. We saw a peak at it last week when they had that 96-yard touchdown drive late in the game, too little too late, but the capability is still there. But they need to have a game where they have 3 drives like that, all ending in touchdowns, and they have some time. I don't even know if they've won the time of possession more than twice this year. Again, I think once was against Michigan and once was against Pittsburgh. Those were the two. Their 2 wins. In every other game, I believe they've lost the time of possession battle. So it's all those things that they did great last year that they shown they can still do great, but they've done it with no consistency whatsoever. And that starts from the top, from coaching as well. I don't feel like Coach Riley has had his best season from a game planning or play calling standpoint, especially in situational moments. He even admitted in the post-game press conference last week that going for that 4th and 2 was a mistake, especially in hindsight after seeing the way the game played out. But I mean, when you got Brock Miller kicking, just punt the ball and pin them back on the 2 and play the field position game in the first quarter. But anyway, I'm digressing. But I agree with you. The Generals are probably the better team here. They probably have the better personnel in the playmaking spots. I'll say that special teams is probably equal between the two teams. The punting and the kicking are both, they measure up quite well against one another. So it'll be who makes least mistakes on Sunday in this game, Luke. And both teams have been prone to making them.
Yeah, and I think to his credit, Skip Holtz had a really good game plan going into face the Panthers. They ran a lot of sort of the read option where it was, Magoo's kind of basically telling Speaks, maybe their best defensive player off the edge, hey, if you want to play super aggressive and come downhill 100 miles an hour and try and blow things up in the backfield, please do, because I'm just going to pull the ball and take it for 25 yards around the end. Or if you all are going to kind of be scared of my legs and what I can do with the ball in my hands and you're going to kind of hesitate, then I'll just hand it off and let Marable get 5 yards, 10 yards, 15 yards up the gut. And so
sounds like DeAndre Johnson to me.
Exactly. Now, granted, that's what the Stallions did last week, so maybe the Michigan will make some adjustments, be more prepared for that this week around. But, nobody can do that better than the Generals. And so, I think if I was Coach Riley, I would just borrow a page out of Holtz's playbook and use DeAndre and the running backs that they have to say, okay, hey, you perfectly guard both of these. So which one do you take away? Whichever one you want to take away, that's fine. We'll just do the other one. So that seemed to work really well for Stallions. Maybe the Panthers make some adjustments and be ready for that. But the Generals, can do that as well as anyone in the league if they use DeAndre's legs or who knows what they decide to do. But they certainly got the personnel. But I wouldn't go to the bank on the Generals. A lot of these teams, it's like, again, it's anything can happen, obviously, as we've seen. So,
yeah, it's funny, and we'll segue out of this game, which is with what you just said, which is you can't really bank on the Generals. In truth, you can't really bank on anybody in this league right now. Not even the quote unquote top tier teams. They've all shown a propensity to getting picked off. They've all shown the ability I guess, to get stopped in their tracks on any given week, and every team has shown that they can play defense if everything's just going right for them. So 3 weeks to go. Well, 4 really. 4 games to go. Strap in, Luke.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I was just thinking, it's like, imagine we had this week maybe the worst team in the USFL versus the best team in the USFL. I guess maybe worst team you would say right now is the Panthers. I guess maybe if I had to say the best team right now, maybe you'd say the Gamblers. But it's like, those 2 teams played in week 1 and the Panthers handled them easily, which again, that was a very different point in the season. And, obviously it's not the same. But if those 2 teams played this week, it's like, I would obviously lean the Gamblers and assume that the Gamblers would win. But like, if you told me, you fell asleep and woke up after, this next week and the Gamblers and Panthers had played and you told me the Panthers won, I really wouldn't be surprised. Right. And that's like a testament to, again, where these teams are at and the level of parity and the very limited space between the best team in the league, we think, and the worst team in the league. So anything is really possible at this point.
That's the truth. And, if I look at the schedule and I just go right down, my picks, Stallions, Stars, Gamblers, Generals, that could be exactly the opposite when it's all said and done. So when I make my picks, I certainly don't make them from a, know-it-all standpoint. I'm just throwing stuff against the wall like everybody else. Insight, I don't think, goes very far when handicapping these games.
Yeah, no doubt.
Yeah. Luke, have a great Memorial weekend, man. Enjoy the games. This is always a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to next week's as well. So, are you going to the game this week?
I'll be there. Yep. I will be there. Should be a good one.
Enjoy. Thanks for watching, everybody. Make sure you follow Luke on Twitter at Luke Miller PFN. Make sure you follow me on Twitter. Follow at USFL Today. And also go to YouTube and subscribe to at USFL Today and get alerts every time this show and all our other shows post. Thanks for watching. Have a great Memorial weekend, everybody. Should be a wild week 7.